I get far more opportunities for ministry through my business than I ever get week to week sitting in my church office or preaching from behind a pulpit.
Hi, I'm Karl Vaters, and welcome to the Church Lobby, Conversations on Faith and Ministry. My guest in this episode is Jon Sanders, and we'll be talking about the rise in covocational pastoring and why it's something that more pastors, especially small church pastors, should be taking seriously. The culture around us is shifting. The idea that someone entering the workplace today will get a single full-time job that pays all the bills is a rarity, and it will grow even more rare. And the church is no exception. But unlike the secular marketplace, we shouldn't be playing catch-up with this. We can lead. So Jon and I talk about several important aspects of covocational ministry, including why the need is growing, how to make that shift without neglecting your congregation, what the difference is between bivocational and covocational, and how to prepare your congregation for a covocational pastorate. And don't forget to stick around when the interview is done. I'll come back with my quick take on what denominations, seminaries, and theologians can do to better help the next generation prepare for the coming wave of covocational pastors. Well, Jon Sanders, welcome back to the church lobby.
Man, it's an honor to get to hang out with you here in this church lobby. Thanks, Karl.
Yeah, although actually, this is actually your first time in the church lobby because you were on the podcast way back when it was under its old title, Can This Work in a Small Church?
Yeah.
And yeah, we talked then about your book, Rural Church Rescue. So this is your first time under the new format.
Yeah, well, I love what you've done with the place. The lobby looks amazing. So thanks for having me in here.
Thank you. Yeah, for an audio podcast, it's all about the interior design of the studio. That's where we put all our money into it. Yeah, when we talked last time, we talked about your book, Rural Church Rescue, and we'll put links to that podcast in the show notes for everybody. And since then, your ministry concentration has gone into EntrePastors.com. I don't know if you had even begun it or if it was just the beginning of an idea back when we originally talked. I don't think it was on track at all at that point.
Probably
so
not.
bring the leaders up to speed. What is EntrePastors.com? What is that all about?
Yeah, I'll give you just the kind of 30,000 foot story of how we got into that and what it is. So essentially, EntrePastors, we took two words. We took the word pastor and entrepreneur, and we shoved those two words together to make a new word called EntrePastors. And what we do is we help pastors really break out of pastoral poverty. Most pastors, this may come as a shock to some in the audience, most pastors don't fly around the world on private jets and live in their mansions. Most of them are struggling financially. And our answer to that is rather than trying to help them, get more out of the church budget or more from the offering plates, like let's help you get out into the marketplace, launch some kind of entrepreneurial endeavor and thrive financially through business, not so much through giving. And so it's really leaning into the bivocational or covocational thing, which is nothing new. Maybe our flair might be a little bit more for the entrepreneurial bent, and instead of working for someone else, start your own business. That's really where we specialize in helping pastors launch their own thing. Real quick, just kind of my journey. So for years, I was a small town rural church pastor, celebrated that space and still do. I mean, I'm still a champion of those that are serving in the small church. Where I kind of transitioned a little bit more into this niche, it's really just serving pastors who are exactly where I was, in a place where you're just constantly feeling that financial pressure of a church that is willing to pay you more. They're just not quite able to. As I went through some career transitions toward the end of my pastoral run as a lead pastor, church planter, what I recognized is the things I'm struggling with, countless other pastors are struggling with as well. And as I started to kind of lean into that for myself, I guess I'm just wired in such a way that says, man, I want to help other people. When I feel like I've discovered something that can really help people, I want to share it. I don't want to just, do it and keep it to myself. I want to help others. So it's kind of an outpouring of not only my own story and my journey, but also that of my business partner, Les Hughes, who's a pastor in Alabama as well. So we kind of have some similar stories, a similar journey, and now we're trying to help pastors who may just be a few steps behind where we were not that long ago.
Yeah. Yours is the first conversation on the podcast about this. I do not expect that it will be the last one, because you use the phrase the churches are willing but not able to pay the pastor a living wage a whole lot of the time. That ability to pay a full-time salary has really changed in the last generation. It was a generation ago, it was not unusual for a very small church to be able to pay not an excessive, but a livable wage to a pastor. They would have a parsonage, insurance rates were low. They'd have regular invitations over to dinner. And with everybody pitching in, it was not unusual to find a church of 40, 50 people who had a full-time pastor, and everybody was kind of happy with the situation. That just doesn't, in the travel that I do, I'm not seeing that as even possible anymore.
No, that is going to be the rare exception, not the norm, not the rule in the days to come. And I mean, it's those days, like you wrote so beautifully in your article, that's the future, and the future is now. I mean, that's the reality right now for the majority. So that model of the full-time vocational pastor, nothing wrong with it. Our position is not that it's immoral or doing anything wrong. I just think it's a model that is probably needing to be reevaluated significantly, because if we're still trying to lean into that model, it's going to cause a lot of very frustrated pastors and churches, and also financially struggling pastors. And so I think there's probably healthier models out there that we could help pastors engage with if they're willing to, change and look at some things differently.
Yeah. The article Jon just referred to is something I wrote a little bit ago, and we'll put a link to it in the show notes, called "How the Side Hustle is Changing the Face of Pastoring." Like I said, this is a subject that I think we're going to come back to a lot, because the ability of churches to pay a full-time pastorate is changing significantly. One, for some of the reasons we just talked about. Two, because the average size of church is shrinking. 21, 22 years ago, Lifeway, I believe it was, did a survey that said the average size church in the U.S. was about 137 people. And then about 10 years ago, that dropped to about 65. And the current data that's coming out is that are closer to 50 is the average size congregation in the U.S. So an average size congregation 20 years ago with a different financial environment in the nation, and with 137 people on average, was much more likely to be able to pay a living wage to the average pastor than it is today. If the average size church is 50 people, that means the average pastor is not going to be paid full-time for pastoring.
Yeah. Or I'll tell you something I see, Karl, that really bothers me. And again, I've been in and around pastoral ministry my entire life. My dad was a pastor. So what I see is churches that will, even though they're really not able to pay a full-time salary, they'll still call it that, and they'll still place a lot of those full-time expectations on a pastor. And that's where I really start to get annoyed and want to help set some pastors free from that, because I have no problem with a church that says, listen, we can only pay, $25,000 a year for our pastoral salary. Okay, I'm not going to take issue with that. Where you're going to get my ire up a little bit is when you say that is a full-time salary and we expect you 24/7, 365. Those days need to end yesterday. And I want to help set pastors free to say, look, there's a much healthier way for not only you and your family, but ultimately the church that you're serving, if you are not constantly struggling with these financial pressures.
Yeah, since you brought it up, there's so many aspects of this we could talk about, but let's jump on that one right away since you brought it up. What are some things that we can do to help congregations understand, first of all, that they're likely to have a bivo or covocational pastor? And we'll do this real quick for those who are maybe not familiar with the term covocational, because it's fairly new. The way I define covocational is that this is being done with intention. There are pastors who want to have one foot in the marketplace and one foot in the pastorate, and that each serves the other. Whereas bivocational has typically been seen as, I'm going to do this side job outside the church until the church is big enough to pay me full time.
Right.
So bivocational has always existed, will continue to, but there's a growing segment of pastors who are going, I'm not working outside the church because I have to, as much as because I think this is an important part of ministry and life for me, for my family, and for the congregation. So if that's the case, let's start with what you brought up. you've got congregations then that are going to need to change their expectations about pastoral availability, pastor schedules. First of all, what are some of the adjustments that congregations are going to have to make? And then secondly, we'll talk about how do we help them get there.
Right. Well, key word there is expectations, and it's really just managing those expectations and clearly defining those. And there's a lot of themes we could wrestle with. Like, one is let's define ministry, because for far too long, we've narrowly defined ministry as a pastor inside the four walls of a church in, their office. Like, we call that ministry. Well, we need to help our congregations understand you, congregation, you, dear church people, are in ministry every day that you go into the marketplace. And by the way, it wouldn't hurt if we put our pastors out in that same ministry / marketplace as well. So that's one thing, is to really kind of get away from that ideology of this sacred versus secular divide. I know what we mean when we talk about a secular job. I get it. But it also kind of implies something if you follow it to its end logical conclusion, and that is that pastors are just a little bit more in ministry than the rest of you all who sit in the pews. So, like, first of all, let's define ministry for what it is and not have it too narrowly defined to be I'm on staff and I work for a church. And then beyond that, what if we come back to really evaluating, was this thing ever designed for one person, one really tired, overworked person to do the majority of the work? What if we get back to this idea that actually a whole lot more of us should be putting our shoulder to the plow based on how God has gifted us? And I'm not diminishing the role of a pastor. I just think we've made almost too much of it to our detriment by putting all of that into one vocation, into one career, and said that's the pastor's job. This model of the full-time pastor has kind of created this thing where congregations can sit back and say, well, pastor, you do the work. That's why we hired you. You're our full-time worker, and we kind of come and consume. And so this is, again, where I think it's such a healthy conversation for a church to reevaluate that and go, no, actually, it's great if our pastor's out in the marketplace just like we are. We know we're going to have to maybe pull some more weight. And also the pastor's not taking a large chunk of the church budget for a salary. So in the end, it really works out. Like, we've got a pastor who has a very healthy line of income and financial support. We have a church that's been equipped and mobilized, and they are also engaging in the ministry. And there's a lot of wins in that. So, those are just a few thoughts for starters.
Yeah. As you're doing that, everything you just said is more important than what I'm about to bring up. But what I'm about to bring up might be the easier on-ramp for a lot of churches, which is, what if your pastor's salary wasn't making as much a demand on your church budget as it currently is? Now, the church budget is the least important of the things. Discipleship is more important. Fellowship is more important. Cooperating together for the Great Commission is more important. But I wonder if it's going to be harder to sell a congregation on that than, hey, you notice how the budget has gone down? What if the new pastor didn't need that amount of pay because we're bringing somebody in who has a foot in the marketplace, who has an expertise out there in the world? This will reduce the salary budget. And hey, in addition, while they're out there are some real lessons we can learn from that. And there are ways that we can cooperate better as a church. How much of that might be an important first step for them to begin to realize, hey, this might actually work for us?
Yeah. And so first of all, I want to celebrate that concept, but I also want to be really clear about something. In our journey with EntrePastors, with our platform, sometimes we've had people come to us kind of misunderstanding what we're all about. And they'll say things like, oh, that's cool. So you help pastors go make money somewhere else so that the churches don't have to pay them. And I'm like, no, that's not it at all. I'm very much still in favor of a pastor being paid fairly for the hours and the time and the value, the results they're producing. So it's not our stated goal to say we want the churches to not have to pay their pastors. But we find this theme often, Karl, with a lot of our clients that we work with, is that's almost a self-governing thing where they want to create in their own church the ability for their church to do other things with those salary dollars and not necessarily feel like such a burden on the church budget. A lot of pastors, especially of small churches, look at the budget and realize how much of that church budget is represented in their own salary. And so we see a lot of pastors voluntarily saying, man, because of how well my business is doing over here, I'm able to either not take as much in way of salary, or if the church hits a financial hardship, I can be the first one that goes on the chopping block, and it doesn't really hurt my family. We have a pastor friend who has said exactly that. Like, because of his entrepreneurial endeavors, he's able to say, listen, if the budget's ever tight, my salary can be the first thing that gets put on hold or gets set aside in order that the rest of the church can function. So I do think it's an attractive thing. I don't want to come in with the expectation that essentially our pastor now gets to work for free, but there is a financial advantage to the church for this as well, for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. That's why I say it's the least important part of it, and it's not what we're really about here, but it might be a helpful starter point of, well, like we began with, the church wants to pay the pastor more, but can't pay the pastor more. So if we can come in and go, you know what you're able to pay right now is actually going to be okay, because this pastor that we're looking at coming in, or the pastor you currently got, has found a way to be able to supplement their income, to be able to do something that's creative or exciting, or at least is involved out in the world that you're in every day too, so that on Sunday when they preach, they're going to have a better understanding of what you're dealing with in your day to day, because they're not cloistered within the walls of the church 24/7, but are actually out in the workaday world, and they understand what it's like to work with non-Christians in a regular environment where they're doing other stuff. So there are a ton of advantages to that we need to help the congregation with. But I think before we get to helping the congregation, the first step is probably going to be helping pastors understand that being covocational is not a downgrade.
Yes.
So help us with that to begin with.
That is so good. And for so many reasons, if we can get a pastor actually excited about being in the marketplace and not feeling like it's a penalty box, or somehow it signifies their failure as a pastor to not be able to, quote unquote, make it, full time. There's so many benefits for that pastor who's in the marketplace. For one, again, just the fact that even if a church is willing to pay their pastor and able, what a pastor is going to find is that there is a very low ceiling to their earning potential, because it gets really weird the minute we call something ministry. And on some hand, I do understand this. When we're receiving charitable contributions from other people, it gets hard to justify a lot of abundance and excess toward a salary that out in the professional world, that ceiling is very quickly removed, when you're engaging in marketplace activities. So financially, man, we can help pastors blow through that earning ceiling that's usually pretty low anyway. I have seen that where pastors have that other thing going on the side financially, there's a boldness that comes with that in their leadership. They are no longer hesitant. Not to say that if you're fully dependent on your church for your income, that this is automatically true of you. But where we see that happening, we see pastors who are just bold in their preaching, their willingness to confront problems in the church or conflict, their willingness to lead innovatively and try new things, because there's not that underlying threat of, well, what if, Gladys, who's kind of the power broker of the church, doesn't like it and, gets the pastor booted out or punishes him through salary. So there's a number of benefits to that pastor if we can get them excited about this. The ministry, as you alluded to earlier, Karl, just the ability to be out in the workforce relating with real people. It's kind of interesting. I look back on my early days in ministry when I was solely focused on building and planting and growing a church, how all of my focus and attention went into that. That's all I knew how to talk about. That's, my wife would say as we're leaving social events, or as we're heading to them, can we talk about something other than church at this event? And it's it was amazing how many meetings I scheduled on evenings and things like that, and had this expectation that everybody comes and helps build the thing here. And now that I'm on the other side of that, I look at this and I go, man, I have much more empathy for where the normal folks are who come and sit in church on a Sunday. They're not looking to come to another meeting on a Tuesday night that could have been held via an email session or something like that. So it makes you much more relatable, I think, and puts you in real contact with people. We hear this often from the people we interview on our podcast, the pastors who are in the marketplace. This is the refrain we've heard time and again. I get far more opportunities for ministry through my business than I ever get week to week sitting in my church office or preaching from behind a pulpit. And again, it's not to take away from the preaching and the work that's done within the church. It's just to say there's probably some more effective. We're missing some people who are not coming through the doors of your church that you can actually go reach through a business platform and be paid for it. So again, many benefits to that pastor engaging that joyfully.
Yeah, I can imagine even in the illustrations you use, the language you're going to use, the tone of voice you use when you talk in a pulpit, when you understand and you spent your time in the secular marketplace among people who are outside the church. And if you're going to be an evangelistic church and you only have insider church language and you're not even able to upgrade your illustrations because you're never out in the real world to hear that people aren't talking about such and such a subject anymore. They've moved on to this subject. I'm not talking about compromising your values. I'm not talking about talking in a crude way. I'm talking about upgrade your metaphors.
Yeah. And join the conversation that's taking place in the marketplace Monday through Saturday, and just be in touch with the very people that we've been called to reach. We would celebrate it, Karl, if a missionary that we sent overseas wrote back home in their prayer letter to us and said, man, I've got an opportunity to work in the community, Monday through Friday, and they're paying me to do it. We would all celebrate that and go, praise God, what an in for ministry. But in the United States full-time pastor model, we look at that and go, oh, what's wrong? Like, are you not making it as a pastor? Like, man, God's favor must not be on your ministry because you're out in the marketplace when you should be giving your full attention to the ministry. There's just a lot that I've come to really question and disagree with that. And now to the point of really pushing back hard the other way, going, I'm very pro pastor in the marketplace because there's a lot of ministry that happens, and to me, it's worth celebrating.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And now a short break to talk about something else. If you like the content you're hearing, here are 2 things you can do to help us. First, forward this podcast to a friend. Secondly, consider becoming a financial partner on an ongoing or one-time basis. Just go to karlvaters.com/support, where you can give through Zelle, Venmo, PayPal, or Patreon using your bank account, credit, or debit card. This will help us as we continue to put these resources into the hands of the people who need them the most. Before we move on to another segment of it, I want to go back a little bit. You mentioned earlier about when you don't have your entire salary dependent on the church, then you have an opportunity to speak a little more freely. I remember back, hasn't been all that long ago, 10, 15 years or so ago, I was talking to one of our denominational officials, and we were doing some new and some fairly innovative things in the church. We were being creative with stuff, bringing some young people in. And as he was talking and asking about how we were doing it, his pushback was, but how do you do it without making the old folks mad? Because the old folks pay the bills. Our churches can't do this because the old folks pay the bills. At the time, I was just too, I don't know if I was ignorant or if I was, I don't know what I was, but I just wouldn't make decisions based on who was paying the bills. I was only going to make decisions based on where I believed God was taking us, despite everything. But while I disagreed with his take, I could sympathize with his take because the bills do have to be paid. But when you take that burden off or lighten it anyway, here we are as pastors, and we're supposed to be leading the congregation towards more biblical things. And at times that means we're going to have to say things that they're not going to like. Mm-hmm. And the old phrase, speak truth to power. But how can you speak truth to power when the power is paying your own bills?
Yep. When the power signs the paycheck. I don't want to overstate this, but this is not nothing, what I'm getting ready to say. And I want to be gentle in saying it. But I think if we look at some of the mainline denominations that have really strayed from orthodox biblical truth, I think the financial piece is part of that. It's a big part of it. Mm-hmm. I mean, imagine you've got a pastor getting, 3-4 years away from, retirement, and this denomination holds their pension. It's like, maybe I won't rock the boat with this. Maybe I'm not going to push back. And praise God for the countless pastors over the years, just like you were saying, Karl, years ago, that's not crossing your mind. You're going to stand for the word of God. You're going to lead in the direction that God is leading you, regardless of the cost. But I can tell you that there have been many that probably, when push comes to shove, they chose their paycheck and their pension. And while we can spiritualize that and say, well, no one should do that, I can put myself in their shoes and go, how much of the boat would I rock if my pension that I had worked for in this denomination for all these years was really hanging in the balance? And if I just sit down and be quiet, I'll let someone else deal with that. So again, I'm not saying that's the only issue, but it's part of it. I believe that for sure.
Oh, yeah. No, I have had direct conversations with people in those situations where they're a part of a denomination that has gone to an extreme unbiblical place on some theological issues, sexual issues, and so on, to
Yep,
the point where they're saying, my conscience is telling me that I can no longer stay here, but my pension requires me to.
exactly.
If I leave, everything I put into my retirement pension is gone. And they stay and are feeling, they've told me, I feel like I'm compromising my values by doing this, but I got to be able to put food in our bellies, and I've got to be able to retire with some funds in the bank account. And I understand the push-pull of that. And I think if we can relieve ourselves from some of that, that would be very, very helpful. I want to talk about a little bit, though, about in the article that I referenced earlier that I wrote, How the Side Hustle is Changing the Face of Pastoring. One of the premises behind the article was, as I look around and I talk to younger generations, and as I'm just out in the world and I see how younger generations behave, there is almost zero expectation by those who are entering the workplace now that they are going to find a single job that will pay the bills, let alone that they'll be at that job or even in that career for the rest of their lives.
Yeah,
And the idea that at the end of it, I'm going to collect a livable pension is not even a part of their language anymore.
correct.
So if we continue to do the bivo and covocational thing purposely, we're actually going to be able to speak to the culture better because, well, first of all, let me back up from that. Before, the idea of a bivocational pastor in a culture where the average person had a 9-to-5 single job that paid the bills of the family, if I'm doing two jobs, that feels like I'm having a failure. And we went through that a generation or so ago with husbands going, my wife isn't going to work because I'm strong enough to pay, right?
Yeah,
That's been gone a while.
yeah,
But now the idea of a pastor that's got to take a second job is somehow a failure. Well, there's no other place in society where that's true. I'm not saying we follow society, but I'm saying that stigma is no longer out in society anymore. And the church, rather than following society in that, take a look at the New Testament. Bivocationality was the standard in the New Testament. We should be leading in healthy ways to do this rather than trying to play catch up.
right. That's the thing, Karl. I've been saying for a while now, and I don't claim to be a prophet or to know the future, but I truly believe that the future of the church is going to look radically different than the past. And I tell you who I don't think is panicking about that is Jesus Christ, the head of the church. I think he's quite okay with the shaking that's happening in the church in Western part of the world. It is going to look, the landscape is going to look very different. And I'm excited about that. I don't know exactly what it all is going to entail, but I just get the sense that, well, God used our kind of more recent past tradition of the full-time model. He used it. He worked inside of that. I don't necessarily know that I see that prescribed in the New Testament in the early church. And again, that doesn't inherently make it wrong. I've been there, done that, have the t-shirt. So I'm not coming at it from a moral absolute. I'm just saying, I think there's probably in the days that are coming, and those days are here, there's a healthier way, a more life-giving way of doing it. And you make a good point. I've never really connected these dots, Karl, but it's like so often the church kind of lags behind in some of these societal shifts. So, there's still churches that are just now getting their first website. It's like you kind of miss the movement on that. That's been a thing for a while. And this is really no different. Like the society, the workplace has become far more mobile. People are not sticking with one job for all their career. And it's just kind of in the church world, we're once again a little bit slow to adopt that and to lean into that. So I'm going to have to chew on that, but that's a great point that you're making there.
I agree with you. The church is going to look very different in the next generation or two. But in some ways, I think it's not going to be new as much as it's going to be really old. It's going to be going back to the original way of doing things with more discipleship, more of a plurality of elders, more of the pastors in the marketplace, and hopefully through that, a greater connection in the world, but not of the world. And in too many ways, we haven't been in the world and we have been of the world.
Yeah. I'll tell you one part of my story years ago is I had built the thing that I was told was kind of the mark of success. We were a multi-site church with a high production value, and it was cool. It was fun to build that. But I looked up one day and realized I am surrounded by Christians. I have a staff full of Christian people, maybe with the exception of our secretary. We weren't really sure about her, but I spent all my waking hours with Christian people. And as I shifted, part of my EntrePastor journey had me shifting back into a full-time career as a firefighter. Now, a full-time firefighter is kind of a weird schedule, so it worked fine with pastoring. But that shift really kind of sent me down this road of like, it was such a refreshing thing to be back sitting around a table with guys who didn't vote like me, talk like me, think like me, do marriage like I do finances like I do, and just to be building relationships in the real world and kind of take that pastor hat off and have an area where I could put some focus that was not just solely on building an institutional church. Like, it was a refreshing season for me. And again, that's just one kind of chapter in my EntrePastor journey that then opened doors for other things that I'm doing today. But I just think there's so much more life here if we can get past this stigma of like, man, it's a failure or it's something to be resisted. It's like, man, lean into this, embrace this. There's some really exciting stuff down this road.
You are a firefighter, and that's got a weird schedule, but it fits well with the pastoring. What I'd like to talk about in the bonus material with you is, let's talk about what are some of the ways that if somebody is currently pastoring and they realize covocationality is where they're going to need to head to for themselves, for their church or whatever, what are some ways at looking at the marketplace? Are there certain types of jobs that have certain types of schedules? Are there certain skill sets that pastors, for instance, the soft skill sets? My guess is that if you have pastored well for some years, you have highly developed skill sets that are in high demand in the secular marketplace that you don't even realize people would really pay for. But between the types of skill sets you do, the type of schedules we're looking for, let's talk in the bonus material about if pastors are looking for a second job, what are the kinds of ways they can begin to do that? So if you do want access to the bonus material, here's how you do it. Go to karlvaters.com/support or karlvaters.com/subscribe. If you become a monthly supporter, you will get the weekly newsletter, which has all of the access to all of the bonus material. Or if you just want to get that for free, karlvaters.com/subscribe, you'll get the free e-newsletter. And every week when you get the newsletter, there will be a link in there that will get you to all of the bonus material that is only available to our supporters and our subscribers. So if you want that help from Jon, that'll be great.
Hey, Karl, can I say one thing real quick to that? Let me make a statement on this side of it. And then if it works, since people resonate with stories, I will tell 5 stories in that bonus section. Okay. Examples of pastors who are doing different types of work in the marketplace. But I'll make this statement on this side. Pastor, I want you to hear this. Every skill that you have honed and developed over your career as a pastor in the church world, your skills are extremely transferable to the marketplace, and they're in high demand and they're valuable. You can be paid very well for the skills that you have developed in ministry. Whether you realize it or not, you have been honing a long list of both technical, practical skills, and then those soft people skills that are desperately lacking in the marketplace today. And it's all transferable. So that's one huge mindset issue we deal with as our clients come to us. It's that idea of, man, I've been a pastor for 20 years, 25, 30 years. I don't know anything else. It's like, well, we can help you very quickly. Just some simple ways of repackaging those same skill sets and applying them in the marketplace. And I'll give some examples of that, of pastors who are doing some really incredible things.
Well, give us one right now. One of those 5.
I launched a handyman business recently, about 2 years ago, and I've helped a few other pastors do the same thing. And I'll just share one quick anecdotal story from this one pastor who's in our business builders group. He's up in Maine, been a pastor his whole professional life. He just started a handyman business about probably 6 months ago at the time of this recording. And the other day he was celebrating in our group. He said, I just made more money in one day through my handyman business than I have made in an entire week of pastoring. And it's something he schedules on his own time. He can schedule it around, his other church functions. He doesn't have to work Monday through Friday in this thing to make money that far outpaces what he would if he was just kind of trading his hours for dollars, working at Walmart or Dollar General, punching a time clock. No dishonor in that, but the entrepreneurial route, we can help you make far more money in less time when you show up, as a business owner providing a valuable service. I mean, I could tell countless stories from my own business of that as well. So that's just one option, a service-based business where you have a skill and you go serve other people with that skill.
Several years ago, for a lot of years here at our church, we had the hardest time finding a good janitorial service. In addition to Sunday service, we have a preschool. So every day we need janitorial service because we run an entire preschool through our church facility. They'd all start great. And within a few months, they're forgetting this, they're not cleaning this up, because a preschool with a church on the weekend is a weird schedule. So they'd forget the weekend stuff, but it's like, we need it clean for Sunday. It's not enough to come in Sunday night to clean it for Monday. We're here on Sunday, and we couldn't get them to understand this. And as I was talking to another pastor about my frustration with, he said, it's the same thing where we are. I'm in California. He was in North Carolina or something. I can't remember what it was, opposite sides of the country. And he said, I actually saw the need for that. And I started a janitorial service. I started by going to a local church, and I was the janitor. And so here I'm a pastor of one church and I'm cleaning another church, but I know the schedule. I know what the needs are because I'm a pastor myself. And they were so happy with it, they recommended me to other churches. I started hiring staff, and now I run a janitorial service. And all I have to do is a few hours a week where I coordinate the schedules of the people who now go and clean. I don't clean anything anymore.
There you go.
But I've been able to reduce my salary at my church to be able to put those funds into other ministry areas. And in a few hours a week, coordinating with other workers, I'm able to bless other churches to have a good janitorial service that they can rely upon. So out of his own need in his own congregation, he saw a way of answering that. If we just think a little bit outside the box, and a whole bunch about ministries, right? Find a need and fill it. Well, entrepreneurship is the same way. Find a need that you can be paid financially for.
Yes.
And fill it as well.
That's a great example, Karl. So a pastor may be listening to this going, man, I don't want to clean. I've been seminary trained. I don't want to go start a cleaning business. Well, listen, first of all, get over yourself and humble yourself a little. But I would say this, you, pastor, have learned how to build teams, how to develop people. So you don't have to be the guy very long with the mop in your hand or the tool in your hand or the paintbrush in your hand. In very short order, you can build a small team that is out. You're creating revenue for them and blessing them, and they're out making you money. And literally today, Karl, as we're recording this, I have made several $1,000s through my handyman business, and I've been sitting here in my home office working on this type of stuff while my team is out, building a business. And certainly I'm a part of that. Where did I learn those skills of working with people? Man, years of being a pastor. So yeah, and there's so much more I could say about that. Like, my role is shepherding my team, and I love it. I love bringing my guys in once a month for a team meal. I feed them, I pour into them. I want to know, like, what's going on in your life, not so much with our handyman business, but how can I serve you? Like, that's where I get lit up. And like, that's ministry, and it's profitable. Like, I'm making money through this. So it's so doable for, a service-based business like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And even the pastor, again, I'm referring to, when he started hiring people in his congregation, youth, adults who he knew were good, reliable people. Why? Because they'd worked together as volunteers, but who he knew were working in jobs that they hated or that weren't paying enough. And so he was actually able to elevate members of the congregation. There's, dangers in that, because if you got to fire somebody and they're a congregation member, that's a different issue. But his first handful of them were that because he knew he could rely on these people. And again, these soft skills of, if you can figure out, as most of us as pastors have figured out, how to work well with a group of volunteers who put in hours and hours of time for no money, then you can certainly coordinate it for people who are actually being paid funds to show up. These are transferable skills. Well, we'll talk about some of those stories and some of the types of work to look for if you are a pastor looking to go covocational. We'll do that again in the bonus material. But before we get to that, and before we close this out, let's get to the lightning round. All right, 4 questions. Question number 1, what are the biggest changes you've seen in your field of ministry in the last few years, and how have you adapted to them?
Well, I'll just go with the theme we've been talking about, the income crisis in the church. Like, the income is dropping as many pastors are finding that their budgets are decreasing, and they need to find something else. And our church went into a skid a number of years ago just due to some farming markets, some of our main givers moving away with their careers. And all of a sudden we were like year after year after year in financial pressure. And so my adaptation was, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not going to be in this place where 100% of my paycheck and my livelihood is dependent upon the charitable contribution or the lack thereof of a group of people. Although I love them, this is putting gray hair on my head faster than I want gray hair. So that's how I adapted, shifted.
I agree. I think this is why I said this is the first, but won't be the last conversation or article that I write about this whole idea, because I think this is the wave of the future. It's changing, and it's going to change even faster. And it's not a problem to fix; it's a change to adapt to.
There you go. Love it.
Yeah. Second, what's a resource like an app or a website that has helped you lately that you would recommend for small church ministry?
Boy, I don't like getting struck by lightning because I got to sit and think about this. An app or a website that's good for small church ministry. Let me just offer this one up, and it's going to sound like a shameless plug, but I will just say EntrePastors.com. If you are a pastor of a small church and you're feeling this crunch, we are a resource to serve first you and your family pastor, and then ultimately your church will experience the blessing of this. So at the risk of just taking a shameless plug, go check out EntrePastors.com and let us serve you if this is something that you need help with.
Absolutely. We'll put that in the show notes. What's the best piece of ministry advice you've ever received?
Man, to God be the glory. Anytime somebody brings praise or adoration or accolades to you, be so quick to just turn that right back to the Lord in an act of worship to him. Whether you do that verbally right on the spot or even just from your heart in prayer to the Lord, give that right back to him and learn to be humble and say thank you to those that are offering the compliments and the affirmation. So there's humility in that, but be quick to give that glory right back where it is due. And that's something I can say from an early time in my ministry. I've tried to make that a habit. I've had many failures and flaws, but I have tried to be very faithful in giving God the glory for anything good people have received as a result of, my leadership or my ministry. So give it all back to the one to whom it belongs.
Beautiful. Yeah. What's the funniest or weirdest thing you've ever seen in church?
And one time I watched one of a staff member at the church I grew up in, portly fellow. He's well built. He was backing up on the stage. The stage was all set up for VBS. It was all decorated with some kind of a treasure island type theme, whatever, pirates, that whole thing. And as he was backing up in the middle of a church service to make way for someone coming to the pulpit, his feet hit a trunk, like an old treasure chest type trunk sitting right there on the stage. He fell down on it, completely crushed the trunk, and his head went back into the baptistry. And here's this big old guy with his feet dangling in the air. It's a very conservative church. Everyone's in their suit and tie. And all we can see of this guy is his feet hanging out of the baptistry, kicking in this trunk that's been just completely destroyed. I mean, I've got a long list of funny things I've seen in church, but there was no regaining composure after that one.
No, that's one of those you just have to pause. You have to acknowledge. You have to help them out.
You got to laugh.
You got to go from there. That's awesome. Hey, if people want to get a hold of you for this, obviously go to EntrePastors.com. Is there any other way to reach out to you if they're looking for more?
Well, I'm on Facebook. You can find me on Facebook or LinkedIn, but truly EntrePastors.com. My email is simply Jon, Jon, @EntrePastors.com. So anything I could do to serve anyone in this audience, man, I'd be happy to do that.
Awesome. We'll take a break from this. We'll come back with the bonus material. So again, if you want any of the bonus material, Jon and I are going to be talking about the kinds of jobs to look for, including some examples if you want to become bivocational. KarlVaters.com/support or KarlVaters.com/subscribe will get you the links to that and get you the weekly newsletter so you can get more of this information on all the podcasts and all the articles that we produce at KarlVaters.com. Jon, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Been my pleasure. Thank you, Karl.
Well, as I mentioned in that interview, this is the first but will not be the last conversation we have about this topic, including Jon will not be the last guest we have about this, because this is a growing need and we need to know a lot more about it. But as a takeaway for this, I want to talk about what our denominations, our seminaries, and our theologians can do to help prepare us for a covocational future. First of all, our denominations. We've got to take bivocationality and covocationality much more seriously as a normal part of pastoring, including we have to adjust some of our schedules. Most of the schedules that we have for conferences and retreats, for instance, only work if you are a full-time pastor, which means a higher percentage of our pastors will not be able to participate in the future unless we change the schedules to adapt to the new reality of covocationality. Secondly, seminaries. We need to train our pastors in practical ways to be prepared for a covocational culture that is coming. One of the things that we have to really take seriously is stop demanding postgraduate degrees before someone can even be called a pastor. Those degrees cost too much money, they take too long, and they are becoming less and less connected to the real world. So we've got to make that adjustment, and we've got to train them better for this new reality. And then thirdly, theologians. We need your help to get a better understanding of what covocationality looked like in the early church. Thankfully, the New Testament is filled with examples of it, including a whole bunch of the New Testament was written by covocational pastors, and a lot of it was written to covocational pastors. So we don't need to look harder for this, we just need to go deeper. So, theologians, seminaries, denominations, please help us move forward by building on that biblical foundation. This episode was produced by Veronica Beaver. It was edited by Phil Vaters. Original theme music was written and performed by Jack Wilkins of jackwilkinsmusic.com. The graphic design is by Solomon Joy. And me, I'm Karl Vaters, and I hope to talk with you again in the church lobby.